As we count down the top 100 heavy metal songs of all time, you may be asking yourself, who came close but no cigar to making the list? Today, we're going to talk about the bands and the songs that came this close. Stay tuned for another great episode of The Metal Dude Abides. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. As you know, if you've been following on this channel, you'll know that we have been counting down the top 100 heavy metal songs of all time, as stated by Rolling Stone magazine. We've been critiquing the list, but today we're going to do a little special episode as we reach into the mailbag from one of our loyal listeners who asks, Metal Dude, are you going to do an honorable mention list? I'm curious of the songs that almost made it, but did not. So we are always here to please our audience. So today, we're going to do the close but no cigar. The bands and the songs that came oh so close to making the list, but just fell a little bit short. Now, when this request came in, I sat down and quickly came up with about 30 songs that I thought were really good candidates for that top 100 list that just didn't quite make it. But we don't have all night. So I decided to just do what we've been doing and just do a top 10. So without further ado, here are the 10 artists and songs that came ever so close to making the list. Now, before we go to that list, this is your chance to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and all the songs that we're going to talk about today are listed in playlists in the description below. Let's get to the list. If you've been watching the list, you'll know that from time to time, I take out a few songs that the Rolling Stone had and replace it with one of my own. Now, sometimes these are very easy, as sometimes the picks that the Rolling Stone had weren't very good. But there were times where the Rolling Stone had a pretty good song in there, a song that I wanted to keep in there, but I needed to replace them with another band. Among some of the toughest calls I had, Sepultura, really good band, really wanted to keep them in there. Even rougher, Suicidal Tendencies, one of my all-time favorite bands, but just couldn't find a spot where I really felt that they could make the lists. But the toughest one of them all, apparently for my fan base, was Bolt Thrower. For those of you who may or may not remember, Bolt Thrower was originally placed on the list by Rolling Stone, and were unceremoniously dumped for a band that I just felt was a little bit better, as I went with Testament, one of the big thrash bands of the 80s. But, as I said then, I say now that, probably Bolt Thrower would make the list as if I did an honorable mention. And here I am, a man of my word, putting Bolt Thrower back on the list in the honorable mention category. Now I'm going to go with the album that we talked about, 2005's Those Once Loyal, and a song that my fans have been demanding since I took them off, The Kill Chain. Now, if you read the comments from my video, you'd know that this was by far the most controversial removal I had through the first 9 videos. And quite frankly, the comments and the critiques were taken to heart and were valid. Bolt Thrower is a very good band, fantastic drums on this selection. And so here I am, righting a wrong. Bolt Thrower is back, everybody. Once again, coming in at number 10, Bolt Thrower, The Kill Chain. Throughout the decade of the 80s, there was a major metal movement that was centered in California. Many people refer to it as the hair metal movement or glam metal, or there was many things that it was referred to. But there's no doubt about the fact that it was the biggest metal movement for at least half a decade. And the list reflects a couple of the major bands that came out of that. We saw on the list, we saw Motley Crue, probably the first of the big bands that came out of this movement. And we saw Guns N' Roses, one of the last bands to really break it big out of this movement. But in between, there was a couple of bands that put out some great albums, some great hits. And one of those comes in at number 9. Dokken. Rhymes with rockin'. And their song, Into the Night, off the 1984 Tooth and Nail album. Now, the only really hard part of this was to select just one Dokken song, as they have many good songs. This was a band that really churned out the hits throughout the 80s, and I think one of the better bands in the entire movement. I really enjoyed Dokken. For at least the first 3 or 4 albums, they were fantastic. And I think, apologies to Axl and Slash, probably the best lead singer guitarist combo going. Don Dokken, maybe the best singer in the entire hair metal movement. And man, George Lynch is right up there with one of the greatest guitarists of all time. Now, the problem with those two is they didn't get along very well. And so Dokken kind of splintered apart after the first 3 or 4 albums. Dokken carried on the name, while George Lynch, of course, famously went off into a kind of a solo career with the Lynch Mob. But when they could get along, no doubt, Dokken put out some of the greatest songs and the greatest albums of the 80s. And man, there was several times where I just wanted to stick them on this list, but never could quite find the right spot for them. Maybe not Motley Crue, maybe not Guns N' Roses, but maybe the third biggest band in the hair metal movement. And like I said, I love Don Dokken's voice. I love George Lynch's guitars. And coming in at number 9, I love Into the Fire. Now, coming in at number 8 is a band I mentioned in the original 100. They were a band I considered putting in the top 100. And they're a band that I absolutely had to have in my honorable mention. The band I'm talking about, Vamps, the Japanese vampire band. Ultimately, I think this list needed to have at least one Japanese heavy metal band in it. I decided at the last minute that Loudness really deserves that spot for a number of reasons. Number one, they're a little bit more metal probably than Vamps. And number two, they were the much bigger, more known band here in the States. But make no doubt about it, if I was to pick the best album in the history of Japanese heavy metal, it would probably be Vamps, and the album would probably be Underworld from 2017. One of those perfect albums we talk about, hit after hit after hit. And so the real, much like I said with Dokken, the real difficulty for me with Vamps is I don't really have a favorite song or where I feel like there's a standout song. They're all equally good. Makes it very difficult. So the song I chose today, Bleed for Me. It is one of their heavier tracks, I think. But again, go up and down this album and you'll find great hit after great hit. Go find this band, run through this album, get your own favorite on this. This band really launched, for me anyway, about a 3-year venture into Japanese metal, exploring and finding that there was some great metal hidden in plain sight, I suppose, in Japan. I have decided, of course, that we need to have a top 10 Japanese metal list somewhere in the future, because there's so much good music that a lot of people haven't heard, because quite frankly, it's very hard sometimes to get things out of Japan. Their media is a little bit different than here in the States. And especially a few years ago when I first started listening to Japanese metal, not an easy thing to do. You really had to be intentional about it. Vamps is kind of a super group formed by one of my favorite singers of all time. I don't even know for sure I'm saying his name right. It could be Hyde, it could be Hide, but however you pronounce it, fantastic. He formed a super group with the guitarist KAZ and put out 3 of the best albums that you'll ever hear. Listen, Underworld 2017 is a perfect album, and I believe it's their best album. But the 2 albums that came before it, maybe a little raw, but also excellent albums. Started digging into their catalog, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Song after song after song. Kind of accidentally found these guys. Was at a concert to listen to another band. Here's Japanese vampire bands. In fact, I had kind of worked out a signal system to say, if this isn't very good, let's get out of here. It was the concert venue was sweltering hot that night. And it was like, I had a feeling that we were going to pull the plug early that night. And then I fell in love. I mean, this band was one of those bands that instantly I heard them. I went, this is great. Went home and just started diving in, finding all I could about the band, and really feel extremely fortunate that I got to see them live. And then a couple of years later, Hide came over with his solo act. Got to see him a second time. Again, if you get a chance to see these great Japanese bands when they're here in the States, take advantage. You never know how many times we'll get a crack at that. So, again, one of the great bands, one of the bands closest to my heart, and really, I implore each of you to go out and discover all the great heavy metal music that's coming out of Japan. But coming in at number 8, my favorite of those, Vamps, Bleed for Me. The year 1980 was one of the biggest years in the history of heavy metal. I would say arguably the greatest year in the history of heavy metal. Why? Because that was the beginning of a metal explosion. For the next 15, 16 years, heavy metal just exploded. We went from being an underground movement to playing stadiums, and just a plethora of different kind of musics. We talked just in the last about, there was hair metal, there was thrash metal, all the different types of metal that came in. There was traditional metal, you name it. There was all types and genres were just pouring into it, and it was all successful. It was a great time. And what started all this? In 1980, the official start of the new wave of British heavy metal. There was some metal before, but when you look at the 70s, generally speaking, with the occasional exception, it was mostly what we called metal then, but now would be more considered hard rock. There was some great stuff, but it wasn't really until 1980 where the bands, inspired by the stuff probably that Judas Priest was doing, kind of launched into this new style of music. One of my favorite eras of music, and I was lucky enough to be right in the middle of it. And I want to include so many bands, but again, one of the problems with the new wave of British heavy metal is the fact that there are tons of great bands that are deserving of recognition. But even in a top 100 list, even in an honorable mention list, you can only mention so many of them. So, on the list, I went with the big 3. You'll see Iron Maiden, Saxon, Def Leppard. But one of the bands that I also included, the Tigers of Pantang. One of the more underrated bands. And that spot could have also gone to this band. Coming in at number 7, Angel Witch. From the album, Angel Witch. The song, Angel Witch. Hey, don't criticize. It worked for Black Sabbath, right? This is a phenomenal song, phenomenal band, really heavy, really fast. And again, this is right there at 1980, the birth of when everything explodes. You're probably going to see a lot of bands and artists coming on my list that really had a big impact in 1980. Angel Witch is one of them, and so they had to make the list. Again, coming in at number 7, Angel Witch. For those of you who have been watching this channel, you probably have come to the realization that I am a big fan of heavy metal guitar and the great heavy metal guitarists. I have several guitarists that I have put on the top 100 list with my admitted man crushes, such as John Sykes, such as Ritchie Blackmore. The list goes on and on. But one of the people that made the list and is one of the top guitarists of all time is a fellow by the name of Michael Schenker. Now, he makes the list with his band UFO, and his other band, even though he's not playing on that particular song, the Scorpions also made the list. But I can't get enough of Michael Schenker, so I'm putting his solo band on the list. Coming in at number 6, MSG, Attack of the Mad Axeman. Anytime I get a chance to put Michael Schenker on this list, I'm going to do it. I think he is one of the best players on this list. And the thing about Michael Schenker that's amazing to me is whether it was in UFO, whether it was in the Scorpions, or whether it was in his solo career, this guy put out such fantastic musical pieces, but they were all very catchy, very melodic, very radio friendly. How Michael Schenker didn't become the biggest star in the world, I don't know. All the politics that goes on with the record labels and the radio stations. We mentioned in the UFO, just hit after hit after hit. We talk about, if you want to see the stuff he was doing with the Scorpions, pull up their album, 1980s Love Drive. He plays on about half that album. One of the greatest albums of all time. Scorpions, very radio friendly. And then the stuff that he was doing with Michael Schenker group. And even past that, he joined up with Robin McCauley for the McCauley Schenker group for a bit and put out a string of hits with that, including one of my favorite ballads of all time, Anytime. So, I don't know. Sometimes you just look and you go, why didn't this guy make it? Who knows? Fans around the world know who he is and love him and adore him, but never really caught on with the general public, I suppose. So again, from 1981, self-entitled MSG album, watch the Attack of the Mad Axeman. As we get into the top 5, we're really getting into bands that just killed me not to put them on the list. These are bands that had such an influence and had such great music. Coming in at number 5 is the first of those bands, Metal Church, with Watch the Children Pray from 1986, the Dark album. Really like Metal Church. Was very tempted to put Badlands in there. Another song of theirs I really like, but chose this one. I was lucky enough to get to see them not too long ago, coming into Denver, and what a treat. And of course, at that point, they were still being led by Mike Howe, who we recently lost. Rest in peace, Mike. But whether you go back to the original lineup or the Mike Howe edition, Metal Church put out so many good songs. And again, kind of maybe a cross in a sense of maybe a little bit thrashy, but mostly the traditional heavy metal band that came out of that San Francisco movement. In fact, when James Hetfield was badly injured in the infamous concert from Montreal, they called Metal Church and said, hey, we need a replacement. So that all those bands were playing together. But again, Metal Church never really fit into the thrash movement like most of the bands that were coming out of San Francisco. They were much more in that traditional heavy metal style. And again, just hated to leave them off this list. So many good songs to choose from. But coming in at number 5, Metal Church, Watch the Children Pray. All right. One more new wave of British heavy metal bands, and then I'm done, I promise. Coming in at number 4, Grim Reaper with Rock You to Hell, off their 1987 album, also entitled Rock You to Hell. First and foremost, Steve Grimmett, one of my favorite singers of all time. This dude had some really awesome pipes. But this is kind of a little bit of a controversial one because maybe Grim Reaper needed a little bit more creativity in their song titles, because just a few years earlier, they put together probably their signature song and their biggest hit, See You in Hell. So Rock You to Hell, when it came out, probably people might have been even a little confused, like, what? I think that I've already done this song, but Rock You to Hell is a very good song. I prefer it to the much more popular See You in Hell. And again, a song about censorship, about this was, again, right in the height of the PMRC movement, and really puts together, it's an awesome song, but if you really listen to the words, makes a powerful argument for allowing free speech in music. So if you've never heard it, or you thought, well, you know, I already heard See You in Hell, what's this? I think this is a superior song. So again, coming in number 4, Rock You to Hell. All right, coming in at number 3 is New Year's Day with the song Malevolence off the 2015 Malevolence album. Now, if we're being completely honest about this might and should have been put is in the number 1 spot. Why, you ask? Because this song actually was on the list at one point. That's how close this song and this artist came to making the list. Kind of a funny story. So I'm very new to this world, if you can't tell. Still a little raw, but I had made some of the first videos for this channel. I was going through the top 10 list, and I had put New Year's Day on one of the lists. Well, lo and behold, I discovered that all the lettering in my video was backwards. So I did some research and found out you have to change your camera settings and whatnot. And so I had to go back in and reshoot those videos. And as I was getting ready to redo the Malevolence one, just so happens I was on an old playlist and the Pretty Reckless showed up. And it was a really good song. And I was like, oh yeah, I love these guys, and kind of got onto a Pretty Reckless kick. The next thing you know, New Year's Day was out, Pretty Reckless was in. It was just that close. None of these there's still outtakes of a video I made with them on the list. That's as close as it comes, folks. But I love Ash Costello. I'm glad New Year's Day made the list. Anytime you make an impetuous move like that, you always think, I'm kind of one who likes to think these things out, and I don't normally make those quick snap decisions, and you always second guess yourself. So this gives me a chance to have my cake and to eat it too, whatever that weird expression is, and have both Pretty Reckless and now New Year's Day on the list, even if it is just honorable mention. Coming in at number 3, Ash Costello, New Year's Day, with their signature song, Malevolence. All right, coming in at number 2, we're going to return to the hair metal movement that was coming out of California. But we're not going to pick a band from California. This band came all the way from the East and the Pennsylvania region, I believe, maybe from Philadelphia, in fact. That band is Cinderella, and the song is Nobody's Fool. Now, the hair metal movement gets a lot of grief because there was some really bad bands in there. There was some really bad music that came out of California, but there was also some great stuff. Not as heavy as like the thrash movement that was happening in San Francisco, but really great music. Cinderella's first two albums that might be a little bit underrated, they were very, very good. Cinderella had kind of a bluesy feel to them, but they had a great lead singer. Tom Kiefer had the perfect metal voice. It was bluesy, it was soulful, but it also had a lot of grit and a lot of growl into it. And this is one of my favorite kind of ballady type songs, Nobody's Fools. But make no mistake, Cinderella was excellent. They had two fantastic albums. This song comes off the 1986 Night Songs. Several good songs off that album. But then coming as a sophomore album, they come in with Long Cold Winter. Very underrated album. I don't think it really had the hit. Night Songs has like 2 or 3 big hits that came off that album. Long Cold Winter really didn't have that huge of a hit, but I think it's a more solid album front to back. And again, for those of you who've been watching the channel, you know I'm in Denver. You know I go to Red Rocks whenever I can to see great metal. And one of the great experiences I've had was actually seeing Cinderella at Red Rocks. And at one point in the show, Tom Kiefer comes down from the top of the stage playing a full white grand piano. One of the more spectacular things I've seen in concerts. Really enjoyed Cinderella. Tried several times to squeeze them in on the list. Couldn't quite fit them in. As you can see, the number 2 honorable mention, very high on my list. Glad that I could squeeze them in here. Tom Kiefer, one of the best vocalists, one of the most underrated vocalists. If you've never heard Cinderella, go back to those first 2 albums. You'll be glad you did. Coming in at number 2, Cinderella, Nobody's Fool. As I'm sitting here, I can't believe this band and this song didn't make the top 100. This was one that I was just always intended to squeeze in there, and then just ran out of spots. One fewer spots than, and it really hurt me to not be able to squeeze this band in there. If you were with me through the entire list, you'll know how fond I was of Soundgarden and Chris Cornell's great voice. And the grunge movement had really 2 fantastic bands in it, Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. I know the grunge movement might be a little bit controversial, but this is not a controversial statement. Alice in Chains, one of the greatest bands of all time, they put an album out called Dirt. If you've never seen this album, if you've never heard this album, we talk about it all the time. It's a perfect album. It is so good. One of the other great albums that came out of the grunge movement we talked about with Soundgarden was Bad Motor Finger. Dirt came out just a little bit after that. So many good songs. The song I'm picking today is Would. W-O-U-L-D ? For those of you who are not familiar with the song. But again, you could pick just about any song off this album. Dem Bones, Rooster, Angry Chair, the list goes on and on. It was just one great hit after another. Dark, moody, Lane Staley's vocals never sounded better. Rest in peace, Lane. Loved this band. You know, the grunge movement had its setbacks. It had its flaws. But man, it produced 2 of the greatest bands of all time. And this one comes in at number 1. Alice in Chains with Would. All right. No more goofing around. No more delays. No more dragging my feet. Next week, it's finally here. The 10 greatest heavy metal songs of all time, according to Rolling Stone magazine. We'll do that critique, and I'm sure there'll be maybe a couple of surprises along the way. But again, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. Help a brother out on a brand new channel. We're going to be doing lots of content. As soon as this series is over, next week we'll be introducing a brand new series. I think you'll like it. So we're going to continue moving on. We want you to be on board. So if you subscribe, you'll get notifications when we put out the new stuff. Again, really appreciate you guys tuning in. In the meantime, we'll see you next Tuesday. But until then, this is the Metal Dude signing off. You take care.